Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into a story that's really right at the heart of modern healthcare. It's about massive success, sure, but also navigating some serious challenges in a market that's just changing incredibly fast.
It really is a balancing act, isn't it? And for this deep dive, we've got the Novo Nordisk Q2 2025 earnings report and their investor presentation. We're going to dig into the numbers, try to understand their strategy.
Exactly. What does it all mean for healthcare, especially, diabetes and the huge area of obesity care? We'll hit the big financial headlines first, then zoom in on what's driving growth or maybe slowing it down a bit now.
And then we'll try to connect those pieces, see what it suggests is coming next for them. Yeah. Particularly given, well, they've actually adjusted their outlook for the year.
Okay, let's jump into that big financial picture. First half of 2025. The top line numbers for Novo Nordisk are pretty staggering.
Yeah.
Sales for the first 6 months, DKK 154.9 billion. That's what, 18% growth at constant exchange rates, 16% reported. That tells you a lot about demand.
Oh, absolutely. And that feeds right through to the bottom line. Operating profit hit DKK 72.2 billion. That's up an impressive 29% CER, 25% reported.
Wow.
And net profit also way up 22%, reaching DKK 55.5 billion, which, pushed the diluted earnings per share up 23% to DKK 12.49. These are really solid numbers.
And digging a bit deeper on profitability, the gross margin, 83.4%. That's actually down just a tiny bit from last year, which was 84.9%.
All right, a slight dip there.
But then the operating margin increased up to 46.6% from 43.3%. So what's going on there?
That's the efficiency story, right? Even if gross margin dips slightly, maybe some pricing stuff or product mix, getting the operating margin up like that points to good control over costs overall.
Okay.
And what's really interesting, perhaps, is the R&D spend. Research and development costs actually decreased by 11% to DKK 21.998 billion.
Down 11%.
Yeah, and as a slice of their sales, R&D dropped from 18.6% down to 14.2%.
Huh. For pharma giant cutting R&D, does that raise concerns? Are they backing off innovation?
I don't think it's necessarily about backing off ambition. It could suggest, that their pipeline is maturing. Some of those big programs, like amycretin or CagriSema, they're moving from maybe more expensive early research into later stage trials.
Okay.
So it might just be more efficient, more focused spending as things progress. A shift maybe from broad exploration to really executing on these near-term potentials.
That makes sense. Okay, turning to cash flow and where the money's going, it's a bit of a mixed picture, which often happens with big strategic plays. Free cash flow was DKK 33.6 billion. That's down 19% from the first half of 2024.
Right.
But their capital expenditure, CapEx, jumped significantly, up 48% to DKK 28.083 billion. That's a huge increase in investment.
It is. And that CapEx increase is a really clear sign they're pouring money back into the business, especially into manufacturing capacity.
Right, building things.
Exactly. The report mentions expanding production, and specifically that acquisition of 3 Catalent fill-finish sites. That's about adding capacity, expected from 2026.
Got it.
So yeah, free cash flow dipped, but it looks like a deliberate choice. They're prioritizing investing for that future demand, betting big on growth continuing.
It really are. Okay, let's pivot to the growth engines then. Sales by therapy area. It paints a very, very clear picture.
It absolutely does.
Diabetes and obesity care. That's the story. That segment drove pretty much all the growth, right? Sales up 18%, CER to DKK 145.4 billion.
And get this, that segment alone, 95% of their total sales growth. 95%.
Wow.
It's almost entirely where the action is. And within that, obesity care was just phenomenal. Sales soared 58% CER to DKK 38.8 billion.
58%.
And that contributed 62% of the entire company's sales growth, just that one area.
Right.
And a key point they highlight, Wegovy supply is now available to meet demand in the U.S. That's crucial.
62% from obesity care alone. Incredible. So if that's the star, what about the GLP-1 diabetes side, like Ozempic, Rybelsus, similar story or different factors?
It's strong, but yeah, slightly different dynamics. GLP-1 diabetes sales grew a solid 10% CER overall.
Okay.
Ozempic specifically was up a strong 15% CER. That accounted for 37% of total company growth. Plus, it got that positive opinion in Europe for peripheral arterial disease, which could widen its use later.
Right.
Rybelsus, the oral one, that increased 5% CER.
But I saw Victoza sales dropped off a cliff, down 52%. Is that worrying or just portfolio evolution?
It's mostly portfolio evolution, I think. It just clearly shows the market shifting hard towards the newer, more effective GLP-1s like Ozempic and Rybelsus.
Okay.
Doctors and patients want the latest stuff. So yeah, it's sort of internal cannibalization, but that's often what happens when you successfully innovate and bring better options forward. It keeps them in the lead.
Makes sense. And beyond the GLP-1s, rare disease also put in a solid showing. Sales up 15% CER to DKK 9.5 billion. Smaller, sure, but still adding 5% to overall growth.
Yeah, definitely contributing. And within rare disease, endocrine disorders jumped 49% CER. That was helped by Norditropin and Sogroya got new approvals in the US and positive signs in the EU for wider use.
Good momentum there, too.
And rare blood disorders were up 6% CER, driven by Nova7 and Alamo. Alamo also got US approval and a positive EU opinion. So, while the GLP-1s get all the headlines, the rare disease side is ticking along nicely, delivering consistent growth.
Okay, let's look geographically. How did things break down? U.S. operations. Sales grew 17% CER, contributing over half the total growth, 54%.
That's right. And they mention a positive impact from something called gross-to-net sales adjustments from prior years.
Gross to net. Can you unpack that quickly?
Sure. It's basically the gap between a drug's list price and what the company actually gets after all the discounts, rebates, things like that.
Ah, the real price.
Exactly. And in the U.S., there was a specific DKK 3 billion adjustment tied to the 340B program that positively impacted Q2. That's the U.S. program requiring discounts for certain healthcare facilities serving low-income patients. So a bit of an accounting boost there this quarter.
Got it. And international operations, they weren't far behind, right?
Nope, up 19% EER, contributing the other 46% of growth. And just like globally, that growth was driven specifically by GLP-1 diabetes and obesity care.
So the same story everywhere, pretty much. Huge demand for these drugs.
It really underscores how global this trend is. U.S., international, it's GLP-1s driving the train.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. We've talked about all this incredible growth, these huge numbers.
Yeah.
And yet Novo Nordisk has actually lowered their full-year outlook for 2025.
That's the twist, isn't it?
Yeah. Sales growth expected now 8.14% CER, down from 13.21%. And operating profit growth revised down to 10.16% CER from 16.24% before. What's behind that revision?
It really highlights that challenge you mentioned earlier. Success brings its own problems, right? You have this massive demand, but that attracts intense competition. And crucially, it attracts those unauthorized compounded versions of the drugs.
Ah, the compounded GLP-1.
Exactly. The company cites the persistent use of those, plus slower than expected market expansion for the branded drugs, and just generally increased competition as the main reasons for lowering the outlook.
So it sounds like the market dynamics are getting tougher, even for the leader. Where are they specifically seeing lower growth now?
They're pointing to lower expectations for Wegovy in the U.S. obesity market, Ozempic in the U.S. diabetes market, and also Wegovy in some international markets.
Okay.
So they're clearly adjusting to a reality that's maybe not quite keeping pace with those earlier super high forecasts because of these pressures.
So how are they reacting? What's the plan?
Well, they're not standing still. They say they plan to sharpen commercial execution, basically. Sell harder and smarter and find efficiencies in costs.
Tightening the belt a bit.
A bit, yeah. But importantly, they're not backing off the long game. They're still rolling out Wegovy globally, still investing heavily in marketing for both Wegovy and Ozempic. And there are big leadership changes, too, effective August 7th. Moziar Mike Doustar takes over as CEO from Lars Frøgaard Jørgensen, and R&D is being consolidated under Martin Holslange. That signals a real focus, maybe a new approach for this next phase.
Significant changes at the top. Okay, let's talk innovation and pipeline. This is where they're placing their future bets, right? Especially in obesity.
Absolutely. The pipeline looks really strong, building on what they have. Amycretin, both the injection and, importantly, the oral version, are moving into phase 3 for weight management. That's huge.
An oral option would be massive.
Definitely. And then there's Cagrisema. That's the combo of cagrilintide and semaglutide. They've started a phase 3B trial, Redefine 11. The earlier results showed, 22.7% average weight loss? Just remarkable potential there.
22%. Wow.
And they're not done with Wegovy either. A higher 7.2 milligram dose has been submitted in the EU, plus an oral semaglutide, 25 milligram dose for weight management submitted in the US. The trial data showed 16.6% weight loss.
So more options, higher doses, oral versions. They're really pushing hard on obesity.
They really are. And in diabetes, too, beyond Ozempic getting that positive opinion for PAD, they're developing Icosema, That's a combo of long-acting insulin icodec and semaglutide.
Okay.
Pivotal trials are done, showed better HbA1c reduction and weight loss than the comparator insulins. That could simplify things a lot for some patients.
And they're even looking beyond diabetes and obesity, MAH.
Yeah, MH, metabolic dysfunction-associated steatohepatitis. It's a serious liver condition. They've submitted semaglutide 2.4 milligrams for approval in Japan, the EU, and the US, where it got priority review.
Priority review suggests it's meeting a real need.
Absolutely. The ESSENCE trial showed it improved liver fibrosis and resolved MHH better than placebo. That's a potentially major new area for semaglutide. And back in rare diseases, Alhemo for hemophilia got positive nods in the EU and US approval, strengthening that part of the pipeline too.
So a lot happening in R&D. Let's zoom out again beyond the financials, beyond the pipeline. What about their wider impact, sustainability, capital allocation?
Well, the reach is just immense. They state they provided treatment to 42.8 million people with diabetes and 2.9 million with obesity. Just shows the scale we're talking about.
Incredible numbers.
On the social side, they highlight women in senior leadership reached 43%. But there is a challenge noted. CO2 emissions increased by 31% compared to last year's first half.
31%. That's quite a jump.
It is. And it's tied directly to that growth and the big CapEx investments, expanding manufacturing, building new facilities that often comes with a bigger environmental footprint, at least initially. It's a tough balance for growing manufacturers.
Yeah, a real challenge. And finally, shareholder returns.
DKK $36.5 billion returned to shareholders in the first 6 months. There's an interim dividend coming in August, DKK 3.75 per share.
Okay.
But interestingly, no new share buyback program for 2025, which again points back to that strategic choice. They're plowing capital back into the business, into those fill-finish sites, into the whole value chain, rather than using it for buybacks right now.
So prioritizing long-term investment over short-term share price boosts.
That seems to be the clear signal. Reinvesting heavily in the capacity they'll need if that demand, even if moderated slightly now, continues to grow long-term.
Right. So wrapping up this deep dive, Novo Nordisk still posting incredible growth, mostly from obesity and GLP-1 diabetes. They've had to adjust their outlook downwards a bit, facing more competition in those compounded drugs. But their strategy seems firmly focused on innovation, building future capacity, and really doubling down on that pipeline. It's quite a story of managing massive success.
It really is a fascinating snapshot of the pharma landscape right now. It makes you think, doesn't it? As Novo Nordisk keeps pushing forward, dealing with these chronic diseases, and as we see demand for these GLP-1s just continue to rise, what does that mean for healthcare access, for affordability globally?
That's a big question.
And how is this incredibly ambitious R&D pipeline we talked about actually going to reshape the future for potentially millions of patients around the world?
Definitely something to keep thinking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Novo Nordisk's latest results. We'll catch you on the next one.